My flight landed at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I took a taxi home because I wanted to surprise them. My mother answered the door in her robe, looked at me, and said, "Oh, we weren't expecting you until Thursday." I had been in the Army for 4 years when I deployed. Deployment was 18 months, which is on the longer end but not unusual for the kind of logistics coordination role I was in, not combat. Not the things people picture when they picture a deployment, but not nothing either. You are away. The particular quality of being away for 18 months, the way time warps, the way the small things at home calcify in your memory into something larger than they actually were, is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it. I won't try to explain it. I'll just say, you come back with a very specific picture of home in your head, and the picture is always a little wrong. Grew up in a medium-sized city in Ohio. My parents owned the house I grew up in since before I was born, a 2-story colonial with aluminum siding that my father repainted every 5 years. The neighborhood was ordinary in the way that good neighborhoods are ordinary. Quiet streets, backyard fences, a park 2 blocks over where everyone's dogs eventually learned each other's names. I had my own room from the time I was 9, when my younger sister moved to the basement suite. The room was mine in the specific way that a room becomes yours over years. The particular smell, the window that sticks in the summer, the spot on the baseboard where I had written my initials in pencil at age 7. I want to tell you about my grandfather's guitar before I tell you the rest. My grandfather was a careful man. He worked in manufacturing management for 30 years and spent his retirement years in the workshop he had built in the garage, where he made furniture and repaired things and kept his tools arranged with a precision that reflected how he thought about the world. He was not a demonstrative man, but he was an attentive one. He noticed things. When I was 12, he gave me a paperback book about engineering that he had saved from a college course in the 1960s, because he had noticed that I took apart mechanical things to see how they worked. He noticed correctly. The Telecaster had been his since the 1970s. A 1971 Fender Sunburst finish, with the solid body and the particular bright, clear sound that Telecasters have, the sound that cuts through everything else and stays clean even at volume. He had played in a small band for about 4 years in his early 30s, just for the pleasure of it, nothing that went anywhere. When the band stopped meeting, the guitar went into a hard case in the corner of his workshop and stayed there for decades. When I was 17, he brought it out, tuned it, played a few chords, and handed it to me. He said he was giving it to me. He said, "You'll learn to play it right eventually. You've got the patience." He said this not as a question, but as a fact he had observed. He gave me the hardshell case. He gave me a note handwritten that said it was mine and to take care of it. I have that note still, folded in a small envelope in my wallet. I spent 2 years learning to play guitar on a cheaper instrument, practicing the Telecaster occasionally, but treating it with the excessive care you give a thing when you're not yet sure you deserve it. I was 18 when I enlisted. The guitar stayed in the case in my room. 18 months away. I had emailed my parents the return date in a formatted itinerary, date, time, flight number, estimated taxi arrival time. I sent it 6 weeks before I came back. I had changed the flight at the last minute, 2 days earlier than planned, because a seat opened on an earlier route and I had taken it. I wanted to surprise them. I thought it would be a good surprise. The flight landed at 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. I took a taxi from the airport. The driver was quiet in the specific way of early morning cab drivers, which I appreciated. Outside the window, the city looked unchanged, same streets, same storefronts, same parking lots, and I felt the slight unreality that comes from returning to a familiar place after a long absence, when the familiar is also somehow foreign. The house looked exactly the same. The aluminum siding was the same color it had always been, the same car in the driveway. My mother answered the door in her bathrobe at 7:15 a.m. She looked at me and blinked. Then she said, with the particular tone of someone who has just had an expectation disrupted, "Oh, we weren't expecting you until Thursday." I told her I had gotten an earlier flight. I wanted to surprise them. She smiled then, the real smile, briefly, and stepped back to let me in. She hugged me in the doorway. It was a long hug, genuine and warm, and I held onto it for a moment because 18 months is a long time and a hug is not a small thing after that. My father came downstairs in his work clothes, already dressed for his shift at the plant, which started at 8. He shook my hand and gripped my shoulder and said, "Good to have you back, son." He meant it. He had to leave in 20 minutes. I sat in the kitchen with my mother, and she made coffee, and we talked for over an hour. She caught me up on the neighborhood. The family 2 doors down had moved. The school had added a new gymnasium. Her book club had read something she'd hated and something else she'd loved. I told her ordinary things about the deployment, the parts that were safe to tell, and also the parts that had made 18 months feel like a kind of compression, as if everything that would normally have been spread across time had been squeezed into a dense, pressurized block. It was good I was home. Then I asked if I could go up and sleep in my room for a few hours before anything else. There was a pause. "About your room," my mother said. The pause had lasted long enough that I had already begun to understand that what came next was not going to be simple. My room had been given in September, 4 months into my deployment, to an exchange student named Pieter from the Netherlands, who was attending the local college for the academic year and needed housing. The arrangement had been made through the college. My parents received a monthly stipend for the room. Pieter was, by my mother's account, very polite and kept the room very clean. I asked where my things were. She walked me to the garage. 4 plastic storage bins stacked, labeled in my mother's handwriting with a marker. My books were in the first one, some clothes in the second. Personal items, photographs, the paperback engineering book from my grandfather, some letters in the third. I went through them methodically, which is what the Army trains you to do with things you need to account for. The Telecaster was not there. I asked about the guitar. My mother's expression changed in a way I recognized. It was the expression of someone preparing to deliver information they know will be received badly, and who has decided in advance to present it as a reasonable thing. Said my father had organized a garage sale in October to clear out some things from the garage and the attic. The guitar had been in my room. They had moved it to the garage when they prepared the room for Pieter. At the sale, a man from their church had seen it in its case and had expressed interest. My father had sold it. She said they hadn't realized it was worth more than what the man had offered. She said the man had seemed like he would take care of it. The price had been $800. I said, my grandfather's guitar. She said, we thought you'd been gone a while and you hadn't mentioned it, and we weren't sure if. I said, my grandfather gave it to me when I was 17. She was quiet. I did not raise my voice. I had spent 18 months in environments where maintaining composure was the baseline requirement. I maintained it now. I asked who the man was. She said his name was Harold Simmons from their church. My father might know his number. I said I would like his number. I spent the next 3 nights on the living room couch. Not because I was making a point. I genuinely did not want to displace Pieter, who was the least responsible person in this situation, but because the couch was what was available and I had slept on considerably worse in the past 18 months. On the 4th day, I called my friend Derek, who has a spare bedroom and has always been the kind of friend who does not ask for explanations before offering help. He said, come over. I drove to his house with my duffel bag and the storage bins and set up in his spare room. I found Harold Simmons in the church directory, which my mother kept in a kitchen drawer. I called him on a Thursday morning. Harold was friendly. He had bought the guitar for his teenage son, who had been getting into music. His son had, it turned out, since moved on to other interests, and the guitar had been sitting in their basement in its original hard case since the previous December. He wasn't aware of its full history. I explained, briefly, that it had belonged to my grandfather and that I had been away and would like to purchase it back. Harold said he would need to think about it and would talk to his wife. He called back the following Tuesday. He said he would sell it for $1,200, which was fair, more than my parents had received, but reasonable given the situation and his good faith. I said yes immediately. I drove to his house that afternoon and picked it up. The guitar was in the original hard case, which Harold had kept. His son had not played it enough to add new marks to it. The neck was slightly out of adjustment from the temperature changes in the basement, but the wood was fine and the pickups were fine and the finish was what it had always been. I drove to Derek's house and sat on the edge of the spare bed with the guitar across my knees. I played for about 20 minutes, careful, slow, working through the things I had been practicing before I left. The sound was what I had remembered, that clean, bright cut that doesn't apologize for itself. I was not playing it right yet, but I was closer. 2 weeks later, I drove to my parents' house while my father was at work, and I sat with my mother, and I told her in plain terms that I needed to remove their access from the joint savings account they had held since I was a teenager. The account had existed as an emergency fund, accessible to them if something happened, and they needed to reach money quickly on my behalf. The fund had been reduced by approximately 60% during my deployment. When I asked about it, my mother explained that there had been some unexpected expenses, a car repair, a medical bill, some things she was vague about, and that they had used it with the understanding they would replace it. They had not replaced it. I said I understood. I said I was going to remove the access. I did this without anger because anger would not have restored the money and would have cost me more than the money was worth. I removed the access the following day. 6 months after I came home, I had a job in supply chain management at a distribution company 40 minutes from Derek's apartment. The work suited me, the same systematic thinking I'd been doing in the Army, but applied to civilian logistics, and my military experience made me a credible candidate in ways I had not fully anticipated. 2 months after that, I signed a lease on a 1-bedroom apartment in a building I could afford. I put the guitar on a wall mount above my desk, in a room that was mine in the way that rented rooms are yours. Provisionally, completely, without anyone else's claim on it. I booked sessions with a guitar instructor who taught Thursday evenings. A woman named Diane who had been playing for 30 years and was specific and patient in the way of good teachers. My parents visited the apartment once that winter. My mother admired the kitchen. My father walked through the living room and stopped in front of the guitar on the wall. He looked at it for a moment. He said, "That looks like the one that used to be at the house." I said, "It is." He said, "Oh, you found it." I said, "Yes." He looked at it a moment longer, and then we moved on and talked about other things. He asked about the job, and I told him about it, and he nodded with what seemed like genuine pride. I did not say the things I could have said. I had considered, in the 6 months since coming home, every version of that conversation, and none of them ended with something better than this. My father, standing in my apartment, looking at the guitar on my wall, understanding without words what had happened and what I had done about it, and what it meant that it was back there. Some things are better said through presence than through speech. My mother sends cards on my birthday every year. They arrive in pale blue envelopes. She signs them the same way she always has. "Love always, Mom." The word always is underlined. I keep all the cards. I have them in a shoebox going back to the first one she sent me at basic training, when I was 18 and the barracks was loud at night, and the card arrived smelling faintly of her kitchen, and it was good to hold something from home. Some things you hold on to because they are yours and always were. Some things you have to go find again. And some things, the hardest category, are the things you have to put down and decide what to carry forward, because you cannot carry everything, and the weight of what you are owed, if you carry it everywhere, will slow you down for the rest of your life. I am 28 now. I am still figuring out the balance. But I have the guitar, I have the Thursday lessons, I am playing it better every week. My grandfather would have said, "You've got the patience." He said it once. He had observed it correctly. I think about that on Thursday evenings when I'm working through something difficult that is slowly getting less difficult. The right things take time. That is not a consolation, it is just the truth. What I have thought about most in the years since is the gap between what my parents intended and what they did. My parents intended, I believe genuinely, to take care of things while I was away. They intended to keep the house functional, to manage the space efficiently, to handle the practical realities of an extended absence. They believed, and I think they believed this sincerely, that I would be fine, that the military would provide, that I was adaptable, that I could land on my feet in any situation because I always had. What they did was make a series of decisions about my belongings, my room, and my savings without consulting me, operating on an assumption that I had given up the right to these things by being gone. The exchange student was economically sensible. The garage sale was practically motivated. The savings account was used with the intention to replenish. Each decision, individually, had a logic to it. The accumulation of those decisions was something else. I have spent time trying to find a simpler word for what it was. I have not found one. It was not malice. It was not deliberate erasure. It was something like the failure to imagine that the person who is absent is still a person, still someone whose room is their room, whose things are their things, whose money is their money, even when they are far away and cannot enforce these facts through presence. The Army teaches you a version of this in reverse. You learn to keep excellent records. You learn to document what is where, who has access to what the chain of custody is for anything that matters. You do this because the institutional lesson is, absence creates ambiguity, and ambiguity creates loss, and the way to prevent loss is documentation and clear ownership. I had not applied this lesson to my family. I had trusted that family membership was documentation enough. I understand now that it is not. And Derek and I play pickup basketball on weekends. We've done this since I was 19, through deployments and relocations and everything else. We talk about all kinds of things, and occasionally we talk about this. He has known my parents since we were teenagers, and he has a clear-eyed view of them that is useful because it is fond without being protective. He once said, "Your parents love you completely. They just didn't act like you were coming back." I said I thought that was accurate. He said, "Most people don't know how to hold someone as real when they can't see them." I said I thought that was also accurate. He said, "Doesn't make it right." I said, "No, it doesn't." That is the version of the analysis I returned to. Not angry, not exculpatory, just accurate. I have the guitar, I have the apartment, I have the job which has grown into a role I am genuinely proud of. I call my parents on Sunday afternoons. My mother asks about the guitar and whether I'm practicing. I tell her I am. I am. Every Thursday evening, in a room that is mine, I practice. I am better than I was and not as good as I will be. My grandfather would have considered this the right direction. He would have been right. I want to talk about what coming home actually is, because it is different from what people imagine it is when they haven't done it. People who have not returned from a long deployment imagine it as a single event. The arrival. The plane lands, you walk through the terminal, someone is there, there is a moment. This happens, but it is not the thing. The thing is everything that comes after the moment, the weeks and months of re-entry, of discovering which parts of the life you left are still there and which have changed and which have been removed without your knowledge. I came home to a house where my room had been given to someone else, and my grandfather's guitar had been sold, and my savings had been spent. These were the visible changes. There were also invisible ones. The invisible ones were harder. I had been living for 18 months, in an environment with very clear structure. The army, whatever its limitations, is good at structure. You know who you are in relation to who else is there. You know what is expected of you. You know what good performance looks like, and you know when you have achieved it. The feedback is immediate and specific, and the rules are consistent. Home was none of those things. Home was my mother making coffee and my father leaving for work in 20 minutes, and the particular, formless quality of civilian time, which does not divide into shifts and does not have a clear purpose imposed from outside. You have to impose the purpose yourself, which I had done before and would do again, but which felt in the first weeks like a skill I had to relearn from scratch. The 3 days on the couch were the hardest part, not because the couch was uncomfortable, I had slept on considerably worse, but because I was in my family's house in a space that had been mine for 26 years and I was a guest in it. The exchange student I had not displaced slept in my bed. My boxes were in the garage. My guitar was gone. I want to be precise about the quality of those 3 days, because it is easy to describe them as worse than they were, and also easy to describe them as fine, and neither description is accurate. What they actually were was disorienting in a specific and useful way. They showed me clearly and immediately that the picture I had been carrying of home for 18 months was not accurate, that home had not been held in stasis while I was away, that things had moved, that the life I had imagined returning to was not the life I returned to. This is information that everyone who has been away for a long time needs to receive, and it is better to receive it quickly, even painfully, than to receive it gradually and be confused for months about why everything feels wrong. By the time I got to Derek's house, I had absorbed the information and begun adjusting. The picture of home I had been carrying was being replaced by the picture that was actually true. This is uncomfortable. It is also necessary. Carrying a wrong picture is more costly than the pain of correcting it. Derek's spare room smelled of cedar and old paperbacks. He had a desk in it, and a reading chair, and a lamp that worked. He did not ask me what I was going to do or when I was going to figure it out. He made coffee in the morning and left a mug outside the door, and that was the extent of the management of my situation that he offered. This is what good friends do. They create space rather than filling it. Spent the first week at Derek's sleeping and walking. I walked a lot, the neighborhood, the park 2 miles away, the commercial strip along the main avenue. I was relearning the specific texture of the city the way you have to relearn any place you have been away from long enough. The city had changed in small ways. New coffee shop, new apartments, a park renovation that had added a small pond. The structure of the streets was the same. The particular feeling of walking them was different. I found Harold Simmons's number in the church directory on a Wednesday of that first week. I called him on Thursday. He answered on the second ring with the cautious warmth of someone who is not sure who is calling and is being polite until they find out. And I explained that I was the family member the guitar had come from, that I had been away in the service, that I was trying to reacquire it if possible. He was immediately warm in a different way, the way people are warm when they recognize a situation that has a clear moral shape. He talked to his wife. He called back the next day. The $1,200 we agreed on was fair. He said when we met to exchange the guitar and the money, my son never really took to it. I always wondered if we'd gotten it from the right place. I said I thought he had the original owner in mind. He said, I did. We shook hands. The guitar in the hard case in the passenger seat of the car I had borrowed from Derek to get there. I drove back carefully, as if the presence of the guitar in the car required more attention than usual, which rationally it did not and emotionally it did. 6 months after that Thursday call, I had my own apartment, my own car purchased outright with deployment savings, a job that was growing into something significant, and Thursday evening guitar lessons with an instructor who told me in our third session that I had good timing for a self-taught player. I said I had been working on it for 9 years, on and off. She said it showed. I think about the timeline sometimes. The guitar was gone for about 8 months in total, from the October garage sale to the following June when I picked it up from Harold. 8 months is not long in the scale of a life. But in the scale of those 8 months, the deployment ending, the homecoming, the couch, the discovery, the days at Derek's, it felt longer. It felt like a gap in something that should have been continuous. The gap is closed now. The continuity is restored. I play on Thursday evenings and on Sunday mornings, and whenever I have 45 minutes and the apartment is quiet. I am better than I was. My instructor says I have developed a clean, patient style, that I don't rush, that I let the notes settle before I move to the next ones. She says this is a choice, not an accident. She is right, it is a choice. My grandfather would have approved.